All right, so that's where we left off last time with just adding some basic stuff. Something that we always want to look at is the details. You may have already found that as you're going through and you're adding stuff to your character that, you know, sometimes you'll hit these spots where you're adding something and then Dynamesh is either taking it away or Smooth is taking it away, and that's fine. That's just part of the process. A lot of it is knowing where to add detail, where to pull back, and then eventually getting there. So something like this gorilla, you really want to create those basic shapes before you even get into defining like the line for the chest, and then even further detail before you went into adding the skin pores, and then even further detail if you were going to try to add like these muscles. So you got to think of it in a very like big stage thing, like what does the outer shapes look like, and then start to work your way in to create those fine details, okay? Even on this character here, he has, let me move my screen over to this screen. There we go. He has 375,000 divisions on there. But if I were to, oh, don't do this to me now, come on. Whatever. If I was to try to add some small details like this in here, number one, they're going to look really grainy, but then when I do my Dynamesh, I feel they go away, okay? So it's just something to be aware of. It didn't go away, unfortunately, but typically they will. Okay. So the next stage that I'm looking at, now that I have the rough shapes of where I want things to be, let me bring this back. I'm going to start looking at the line work of how the muscles in the face are all starting to flow. So this character here, where these lines are coming around the eyes and they're coming in like this, I want to start laying the foundation for that. Inside here, where this is coming out and dipping down, this is coming in and dipping down, I want to start laying those things down. Same thing here, you can see the line work there, the line work here, how this is coming around there, how this is coming around here. And then the same thing here, okay? If you go to this stage too soon, you have to type in the right window, add ZBrush head. You'll end up with one of these bad ZBrush heads, okay? Stuff like this, that's like way too much detail, way too soon. The eyebrows, no one's eyebrows I don't think are like that. Those lips are huge, there's no definition to them, there's no form to the character. You know, this one's kind of like eh. This one too, they just kind of like push the cheeks in. This one is just all over the place, it's just like flat and not really, you know, appealing. When you type bad ZBrush head, you should not get all these good ones. Let me click back on the bad one. Maybe it'll pull up some other ones down here. There we go. So there's another bad one, obviously. All right, that's not too bad. Okay, but look at muscle, look at the definition that we would need for stuff. You do want to use reference. Like I said, I'm always using reference. The door. So I'm always looking at reference because I want to make sure I get those lines. Even a really cool head sculpt, like you can go all the way to the end where you're creating something like this, and if this muscle right there, or that whatever it is, right there is not lined up correctly, the whole thing will fall apart. It won't literally fall apart, but it'll just look weird, it'll look off. And usually people make them just very like this, so they just put them right there. And that's not how the model should happen. It should be flowing around there, okay? So I'm going to start adding in some other details. And let me just try this again real quick. Wacom, yes, you're working. Click, yes. Let me just reboot ZBrush again real quick. Sometimes the tablets, for whatever reason, they don't want to update. So I'll click S, I'll drag, and it doesn't update. There's a finished version of my character. Oops. Right here. This is all rendered out, tweaked, modified. This is what the original render looked like, and then that's my tweaks after the fact. Okay. We'll get more into that when we get into that side. And then I'll go to recent, and then I will click on this head. There we go. Let's see if this works. Yep, there we go. Okay. All right. I don't know why it does it, but it does it. Before I go to the next stage, I am going to make this a... Oh, see, now it doesn't want to do it. You're so silly. There it goes. I do want to make the shoulder area just a bit deeper. Eventually what's going to happen is, you know, I'm going to put this into a rendering, and I don't want to have be out of space. So if I just pull this down some, this will give me a bit more room to work with. Oops. Now I'm getting into this area where as I move, it's grabbing the stuff above it. Even though I'm underneath and I grab, it's pulling that down. So I'm going to use something different. I'm going to use a mask. Come on, click, drag, there we go. If you hold Control and you drag, this is going to create a mask that you could then use as a selection tool to move stuff. So I'm just going to select. It accidentally selected stuff up here, so I'm just going to Control Alt and subtract from the mask, shrink my brush. And then I'm just deselecting that area. Inside of your brushes, there's like 1,000 other masks that you could also grab. Different ways to select stuff, which we'll get into eventually. There we go. All right, so I think I've deselected all the stuff. If I switch to my move tool and then I move down, it's going to move the opposite, right? So I want to swap that, so I'm going to hold Control and just click, and that will swap whichever one was masked. There we go. So it didn't grab everything. Apparently I missed that, but I can just smooth that out. All right, so now I'm just going to switch back to my draw tool, Control drag over here to get rid of the mask, and then smooth this out. My tablet is testing my patience today. It's not wanting to play nicely. All right. We're not going to use the tablet. I don't know what it's doing. It's just not playing nice. Sometimes you have to reload your drivers, and then everything is cool. But not now. All right, so, oops, too much clay buildup. When you use a mouse and not a tablet, you really have to be delicate on how you add detail because it'll just pile it on top and it's just way too much. And you'll spend a lot of time clicking as you add more detail to those areas. All right. So now I've given them a bit of thickness here so that I can add, you know, if I'm framing this for a photo or something, I have a little bit more room, where before he was actually cut off and I was kind of limited to where he was. I do want to chop the bottom so it's clean. So I'm going to use a trim brush. So B to get to the brushes, T to get to the trim, and then there's a trim curve. Okay. If you watch any hard surface modeling, they use this tool a lot because you can create some really crisp lines. If we hit the Control key, this is masks. So just like Shift is always going to be smooth, Control always takes us to the mask area, and then Control Shift will take us to the trim area, okay? So I'm going to use Control Shift, and then I'm just going to click and drag, and whatever is in the black area, that goes away. So I let go, gone, okay? So especially if we're trying to create a model that will sit flat, now we've done that. And if I look underneath, you'll see a perfectly crisp area. And then just don't look at the back of this. Just fix that. So we'll add some extra detail here, smooth this out. Just Control Shift, because I selected the trim curve tool first. And then you just drag, and then slice. And a lot of times too, like I'm not holding shift while I do this, it's automatically snapping, or I am holding shift, but I'm not holding anything else to snap that. But there's other things you could hit. I believe if I let go of shift and hit control, no. There we go, I hit alt. You can actually like curve it, and then you could subtract stuff this way. Okay, I don't want to do that obviously. All right, so he has a little bit of thickness. I'm going to start adding in some detail to his face. So this is where I'm going to start to draw in where I want those muscles to be. All right, let's give you another shot. Maybe you just needed a rest. There we go. Okay. So that's still too aggressive. Maybe if I just go up here and do this. Now, click and drag. All right, I will use my hotkeys there. And whoops. There we go. Oops. I accidentally selected a different subtool somehow. All right, so now I'm going through and I'm just adding in this line work for where the muscles of this area would be. And what you'll find is that just doing these kinds of things help give the character a lot more shape and help it feel more realistic, because then we feel like there's an actual flow to the face. I'm using my mouse and the tablet. There we go. You'll see how I'm wiping across here. I'm pulling this area down. I wonder if it's my pen. Maybe it's my pen. Go. And then I'm also going to go into, I'm going to do this a lot up here, just kind of getting this line work. And then I'm also going to do this in the neck area. And so something to look at is, if you look at your own neck or you look at just pictures of real people, your neck typically has a lot of folds that go sideways, a lot of line work. So as I go into here, that's the direction I'm going. I'm not going up and down because that's not how the lines are at. The lines are going this way, so that's the direction I'm drawing this in. And I'll make my brush smaller, and I'll draw some thinner lines here. Now try not to get in the habit of everything is the same size. That's always a bad thing to do. And then also try not to get in the habit of everything is always a pull out. Typically you want to push in as well. So I'm going to hold Alt on a couple of these lines so that they do wrap around his neck. I think it's because I have my other drivers on here too. I have a different tablet at home, and that's probably why it's not liking this. It might be. Let me close the other tablet's settings. Let's exit that. I think that was it. Nope, it's just stupid. Okay. So I'm going to do that. I'm also going to go into my Damien standard brush. I'm going to shrink the intensity, shrink the draw size. And I'm just adding line work. You might get rid of a lot of this later. You might smooth stuff out. But the idea is that you have the foundation for all the stuff that you're going to be adding to it. Also, when we get into Keyshot, which is where we're rendering these, we need to add a lot more detail. It needs to be a little bit more apparent than you would typically see it. So even though this may be really deep here, that may not come off in KeyShot the way that we think it should. Okay. So like this is maybe a little bit too much, so I'm just going to soften that. That's way too much softness at once. There we go. Just going to re-plug my tablet in, maybe that'll help. Nope, still nothing. Weird. All right. Eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my Geometry tab when I get to a certain spot. I'm going to go to my Dynamesh, and I'm going to pull the resolution up. Now, just like everything else, my tablet's not working, but you want to increment this. So right now I have 340,000 divisions. When I control drag, it'll tell me up here 1.7. A huge jump from one spot to the next. So I really want to back off this a little bit too much of a jump. If I hit escape, it may stop before it's done. It didn't crash. ZBrush does not crash. All right, so 1.7, that's way too much. Let's pull this down to about 500 and drag. And before, probably good. Now, you may want to add like veins to your character. You may want to add scars or stuff like that. Come on. Click a million times. Let me zoom in. So I'm going to add a scar to both of his cheeks. If this is something that would be on one, I would typically save this for later because I don't want this to be symmetried. I still want my symmetry to work until pretty much near the end of it. So here I'm going to add a scar to his face. So I'm going to go to my clay buildup, and I'm just going to draw in the kind of scar that I want. Okay, so I'm just creating basically an outline. The way that scars typically work is they have a raised section and then an inset, like deep section. So I'm imagining that there's like a gash here, a hole at some point, a pretty deep hole. And then this is the injury healing itself. Okay, so I pulled this out, and then I'm also going to push this in. I'm going to take the intensity up a smidge. And then I'm going to make my brush bigger. Oops. And then I'm going to kind of soften this here. And then I'm going to go in with the Damien standard brush and then just cut right into that. And then I'll hold the Alt key, and then I can pull this side up just so it feels like it has a little bit more of a raised section. And then I'm just going to soften it some. And then I'll spin around some. I'm switching back to my clay buildup, shrinking my brush down, and then I'm going to Alt drag into here. And then really just kind of soften some of that stuff. So now it looks like he has some sort of, gash or something that's on him. If I want to emphasize it a bit more, I'll drag these lines so it's not just contained to this, but I'll have these kind of pull out a bit further. That's way too intense. Now imagine I'm not using a mouse and a tablet. This goes a lot quicker. There we go. There we go, so stuff like that. If I want to add a little bit of detail underneath it, shrink my brush. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to start to add some. Now looking at the resolution, I can see all the divisions here. This is probably not enough divisions to do what I want to do, so this might be something that I just have to save for later to add in. But the idea is still going to be the same. I'm still adding some shapes, and then I'm using the Damien standard brush just to cut in some areas there, and then I can use my bigger brush. Then I can use my smooth and just smooth some of these areas out. There we go. So now it looks like we have some sort of indication right there. On my previous character, I had him have more of floppier cheeks. So, so here's how you can add some more like skin sagginess. So I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to create a shape there, and create a shape here, and then I'll create a smaller shape like there-ish. There we go. And then I'm going to go to my mask pen, and I'm just going to mask off parts of this. Oops. There it goes. If I select too much, I can just use that Alt. And then I'm going to Control-click, switch to the Move brush, make my draw size bigger, and then I'm just going to pull these down some. And then Control-click and drag, and then smooth that out. A little bit too aggressive on this one because it actually went like into the skin. But that'll be a good starting point to then start to add in some of the other detail. I just stopped altogether. All right. There we go. There we go. Much better. All right, so now, except for this one, which looks like he just has a melted face, just need to start shaping this a little bit better, and then start adding some detail on top of those pieces. And then I'll come back at some point with my Damien Standard brush and then just start cutting into this a little bit, just so I get more of that line work coming in. Okay, not really a good spot for it on the nose, but the idea is there. Okay, other stuff that I'll do is I'll go to the ears and I'll just give them a little bit of pinching if they need it, but I hold down Alt. Oops. Nope, that's not it. I use inflate, sorry, not pinching. And I'll give them a little bit of inflation just to give them some thickness. Then I'll use my clay buildup, and I'll just start cutting into the ear like this to give it more of that cartilagey shape. Let's add a little bit more intensity. There we go. And then smooth it out, maybe a little bit more intense on that. And then to create some of the crispness, I'll use my Damien Standard to Alt drag a line like this, so it feels like we have that little cartilage of bone right in the ear. And if I need to soften it, I can soften it and it won't, hurt it at all. And then the same thing here, I can sharpen that up some to intense. So a lot of times what you'll see is not only just the cut on the inside, but also going like the pulling it on the outside, but then pushing it on the inside to make it feel like those lines are reading a lot better. This is a little bit too bubbly here, so that's got to be smoothed out. And this is exactly why you don't want to go too detailed on your stuff. This is still a low intensity on my smooth. If I had 1,000,000 divisions and I add any line, it won't smooth out. I will spend an hour and a half trying to smooth it, and it'll just take forever. There we go. So that ear is looking a bit better than it was before. Obviously, we can still add some detail to this if we need to, and so on. Okay. So I'm going to jump to my next version, which is that one. Okay, so this one I've added a bit more detail to him. This one I've gone up to about 3.5 million divisions. You'll see I added some lines here for this. I wanted some crisper stuff there. I've added some detail work around the eye here. This is all just clay buildup and then just kind of smoothing it in there. A lot of these lines like this are just the Damien standard, just kind of cutting in a line. If you have a hard time drawing a straight line, switch to the back of his head. So as I draw this line like this is, you know, I might spend, let's make it a little more obvious, there we go. I might draw one and it just comes out kind of like wobbly like that. Under your stroke, you can do what's called a lazy mouse. And what this does is it'll actually average your points and create a smooth line on there. So sometimes I'll take this smooth up, and then as I draw, that's not smooth enough. It creates a smoother version of that line. So that's just with my mouse, that's pretty smooth. And then obviously you can go pretty high up there and create some pretty nice looking lines like that. Okay, now this one is 3.5 million, so this is what I want to show, you know, smoothing something like this out. I've smoothed it once, that's pretty aggressive already. I'll smooth it at 100 and you'll see that it's going to take a few passes to do that. And again, why you don't want to add big details at this level. This level, by the time you get up to 3.5 million, you really aren't doing this because that's like way too much stuff. So I'm just going to undo, undo, undo. There we go. Okay. Now, some of the other work that I've done on here is just using, like I said, the Damien standard and just drawing some of these lines kind of following along. So you'll see how I'm just adding some more of these lines in here. I'm doing big ones, I'm doing smaller ones. Sometimes I'm going over the same line a couple times. If you look at your hand, it's not like you have one line there. You have this one line, but then you have all these like little lines that kind of follow it too. So that doesn't hurt to have that. Here on the neck, that's what I was showing before, going across this. And then I did eventually come back and do some vertical ones, but that's after the fact. And that's not everywhere, that's just in these kind of side pieces here. Stuff like this where I have these spots, I can go to the standard brush. I can go to my alpha, and all of these are different brushes you can use. These are basically black and white images, so you could actually grab images of bumps or whatever and use those here as well. So one of these is, well, let's just do the vein one. So where it's white, we're going to have veins, and where it's black, we're not going to have veins. And if I drag, it's going to look like this. So if I'm trying to create something crackly, yeah, sure. Typically, I'll use this with the drag rectangle. And what I can do with it is I just drag and then let go, and then now I have these veins right there. Okay? And again, you'd want to use reference for that because typically you don't see veins like on the back of someone's head like that. You know, typically you would see them in close to the surface areas, like right in the temple. So right there would be a more obvious spot for that. Now, the higher my intensity on that brush, the bigger those veins are going to be. So you just want to be aware of that so you don't go crazy. Usually what I'll do is I'll draw in the veins like this. And then I may go through, let me lower my smoothing. I'll smooth that out. And then I'll go through with my Damien standard brush and just kind of outline some more of these things. Or I'll go through with my clay buildup. And I'll kind of make a couple of these just a little bit bigger. If you look at like human veins and the ones that are, you know, pretty disgusting, pulsating, whatever things sticking out of your head, usually they're not all the same size, which is what that one is. Usually you want to have these ones that do have a little bit more variety of thicknesses. Okay, so maybe like this one has like a little clot or something right there. And then we just, with a tablet again, this is a lot easier to help bring it in there and smooth it. But that's going to give you a lot more of that look versus, you know, just leaving on that standard shape. because the shape that we have for that, this, does not change every time we use it. It's the same brush, it just rotated. So anyone who's looking at your stuff, it's going to be obvious, oh, you've just used that brush. Now I will also show Zbrush Central. There's a website called Zbrush Central where you can actually download, that's not it, sorry, Zbrush brushes. Pixelogic Zbrush brushes, there we go. Nope. Maybe they changed the name of it. But anyway, there's a website. It is Zbrush Central, there we go. It was just inside it. No, wasn't that. Textures, Pinterest. Anyway, you can go online and find different brushes that are out there that you can actually download and use inside your stuff. There it is. Zbrush Guides. So they did change it because it was not there before. So here's different brushes for wrinkles, skin folds, creature deep scars, burnt scars, whatever. Some of them are pay, so depending on the website you would go to, some of them are pay. Some of them are free, so you can check those out. If you do have one, I can go here and I'm going to go to import. Oops. And I'm going to import a brush into my scene. A while ago I signed up for this guy who basically had like his lifetime pack. Like anytime he releases anything, you can download it for free. And so I have that here. These are all the brushes I have. So if I go to creature, oops, that's not the right one. There it is. Terrain, cracks, random, monster set. Nope. All right, let me go to his free ones. I'm not sure why the other ones aren't showing up like they should. There it is. So I click that. And now I actually have a brush inside here that is his Xmd brush. So then as I'm painting on here, very aggressive, I'm adding in that detail. So I'm going to switch this to drag rectangle and then drag. And then you can see how I can add some of that detail in there. Now any of these that you get that you're using this drag rectangle, keep your brush small and go in small increments. So you might have to go around your entire model doing this kind of thing. Or you can change your brush to a spray. And then just keep it small and soft. This one is probably not a good one to be spraying on here. A little bit more intense. There we go. And what this is going to do, let me smooth out this area, is it's going to just soften, or not soften, it's going to add a bunch of detail to that area. So the back of his head where he doesn't have any hair or anything, we're just going to go and add that detail. And so what we're going to get is a skin pore-like detail here. Now you can use the ones that are already here. They actually have a couple brushes that are similar to this. But it's just good to have a variety of different patterns. You could even make your own just in Photoshop, making a black and white image. So if I take this, which is that skin pattern, I go in with my Damien standard brush and I start to draw in some of these lines here. A lot subtler, a lot smaller brush. There we go. Now I can start to make it look like this person actually has some sort of skin texture to him. You don't want to go smooth on it because it just looks fake. No creature has anything that's like super smooth. Okay, and now to even stack on top of this, switch back to my standard brush, switch here. Where are my lines? No, not that one. There you go. So there's this one here you could use, which is this kind of rocky texture. Really big, it looks stupid. But if you make it small enough, you can add some little details here and then maybe just kind of smooth it out some, right? So like on the side of my character, where I have these dots, that's all I did there. I just drew in some of these things. And then I went with my clay buildup, super low res. Added a little bit more definition to a couple of these so they weren't all the same height. Smoothed it out some, and then there we go. Okay. Now this resolution is 1200. So this isn't the 300 I started off with, and then 600 or whatever. Or I think I started at 128. Yep. So this is 1200. Yours is going to be different. You just have to figure out what your numbers are for getting it to that point. But when your model is done being modeled, you should have a good amount of layering done to it where it feels like nothing is perfectly flat. Nothing is, everything feels like it has some substance to it. Even his nose feels like there's probably a bone underneath it or cartilage that's holding the shape here. Even his cheeks, that's why we have these lines right here. He probably has a cheekbone right there. Probably has a jawbone right there because I can imagine what the teeth would look like inside. His ears are a little bit weak. They need to be a little bit more developed here. His collarbones right there, you can definitely tell it feels like a collarbone. And you can see this is where I was talking about it went too short. Mask. I'm going to do a mask rectangle. Yes, that's fine. And then I will draw this. Like that. Click. And then I can use my move tool and then just drag that down. Now this is why you want to do it early on. With me having 3 million divisions, and then I try to smooth this out, it's not going to smooth out very nicely. Even when I control drag to redraw my shapes, to dynamesh it, it's going to just add more divisions here, and it's very difficult to then smooth it out. At the very beginning, you don't have that. No, not working, it doesn't work. And if I can't do anything, it's just frozen right now. But then the higher we would draw. All right, I think it's done. Yes, it is. Okay, so it was also saving at the same time, which is why it did that. All right, so if I look at my divisions here, you'll see they're all over the place. Trying to smooth this out, even with my smooth all the way up to 100. As you can see, it's barely moving. So it would take a lot of work for me at this stage to really smooth that out to get this to work correctly. I could do it, it's just going to take some time to do that. Okay. Now just so you can see, this is the amount of detail that I had in this character. And then once he was rendered out and he was brought into Keyshot and then rendered from there and then brought into Photoshop, this is the detail that he has. So you'll see that some of this detail doesn't read very well, which is why you have to push the detail a bit further. Let me go to this actually so you can see. So you can see some of the line work there. You can see some of these lines are definitely coming in. Where we kind of lose some of it, right? So just be a little bit more aggressive on your textures. Obviously make sure that form is there before you go any further. The last little bit I want to show is just the eye stuff. So I'm going to make a brand new sphere. So I'm going to insert. I'm going to put a sphere. And then I'm going to shrink this down. Do not switch. Where do I keep hitting? I'm going to shrink this down to about the size of his eye. And then I'm going to turn off my other stuff. So I'm going to turn him off, turn off this eye, turn off that eye. I think I have that. Nope. One of these is his eye. This one? Yep, that's the one there. Okay, so there's the eyeball, which is right here. I'm going to rotate it so I can get it closer to the camera. That's not rotating. There we go. I'm going to add some divisions, so I'm going to hit Control D. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sculpt the eye. So if you want a character to have a nice looking eyeball, you have to actually sculpt the eye part. Okay, so the eye comes in two flavors. One is the inside part of the eye, which is actually the colored part that we see. The other part is this like glassy part that's on the outside. So we would sculpt the inner part, and mainly we're sculpting this. It helps to also look at a wireframe, especially to see the planes and the different dimensions. So I've got this one. So if you look at this eye, it's rounded and then it dips in right here, okay? And that's where the pupil is and that's where the iris is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my standard brush here. Come on. And I'm going to push this in. Make sure my settings are back to where they were. So back to this, back to that. And I'm just going to push that in. Okay, make sure symmetry is still on. Yep. Okay. Now, if I push this up too high here and not enough at the bottom, it's not going to be rounded. It'll look weird. So I'm going to go into my transform. I'm going to turn on Radial Symmetry. And what this will do is it'll work in a circle so that we can create the iris shape. So this is Z. I'm going to change my amount to about 16. There we go. Okay, so now when I hold Alt and I drag, now I'm creating that shape. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm creating where the iris is going to be, which is going to be about here. And then I'll create where the pupil is going to be, which is going to be about there. Okay, and I'm just looking at the different planes. So it's rounded, it goes into the iris area, cuts, and that's the pupil area. Okay, and again, I started off with a low res shape. That's good there. I'm just pushing it really far in so we don't see it. And I'm just going to use the Control D for this one. I'm not using Dynamesh at this point. So now, now that I have this, then I'm just going to start to shape what I want the eye to look like. And again, use a reference. Don't be a hero. There we go. This is actually a pretty good reference. So looking at the planes here, there's depth. There's actually thicknesses there. There's a bunch of different lines. You can see that this inner part, which is darker, looks dipped in. This part looks like it's pulled out. So I'm going to go into here and just create this one level. And then I'm going to go here and just create another level on top of that. Okay. Make this brush smaller. I'm going to change my focal shift to a bit tighter. And then I'm just going to start to draw some kind of organic-y looking shapes. Okay, as it's an eye, there's definitely some features we need to have. Like if you look at all eyes, they have some sort of radial lines going inward. Right, so they all have these lines going inward, so I need to encapsulate that. But then we also have these like shelves. So you'll see how I'm pulling stuff out, also pushing stuff in. And just trying to emulate that. I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive on this for a couple strokes. Okay, you want this to look like there's levels to your eyeball. I'm going to duplicate or Control D again to get some more divisions in here. At this point, just the eye itself has more divisions or about the same amount of divisions as my character, but that's fine because in order for me to get the detail that I need to have that many divisions there. I'm going to switch to the Damien standard brush, pull the intensity up some, start cutting in some extra lines. There we go. I'll also jump to my radial count and I'll lower this. So if I was at 16 before, I'll go to 8 and now I have less shapes there. So everything isn't always going to be the same kind of flowery type of pattern. I can also switch to my clay buildup, maybe add some shapes in here. There we go. I'm not too concerned about where the iris is, or the pupil is. Like what happens there, because I can just delete that afterwards. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and just add a bunch of detail inside here to get that. And then if I go to my eyeball, it's taking forever. And the good thing is, once you make one eyeball, you can really just kind of use it as a base for other eyeballs, obviously. Once you create one textured, you can change the color of it in Photoshop. It's almost done. There we go. This is with my undos also knocked back. This is 888 undos. It's loading. That's why it's taking so long. There we go. All right, let me turn off that. There it is. So this is with it colored. I'll go into coloring on another day, but you can see all the different levels and detail that's inside there. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just like make it look cool, make it look like there's different patterns on top of it. Obviously making sure that you encapsulate that line work in there, which is, you know, very iconic of an eyeball. If you were doing like a dragon eye or something, obviously you could go slit-wise and draw it that way too. That would be a possibility. Even on here, if I just turn off my Radial Symmetry, and then make sure this is on X, make sure that's off. You know, and if I'm just in the Move tool, I can still do stuff like this. Oops. Why are you moving that way? You should be going inward, not left. That's not it either. Transform. Mirror symmetry, there we go. So even with that one shape, I can then create this kind of shape, and now I have more of like slit type of look to it. Okay. So other areas you're adding detail, just more detail on the character, getting to that level of line work, facial lines, skin pores, you know, the whole lot. Just trying to really get in there for all of that. Next week we're here just on Monday, so I won't go over everything then, but when we come back, I'll go over the other stuff.
You mentioned last time with the fiber mesh.
Mm-hmm.
When I tried to use it, all it did was it gave the whole model hair.
Yep.
All the way around.
So, oops. Let me deselect him real quick. Let me go to my brush, mask, and K, I believe it is. Yes. There we go. So something like this. Click off, and then if we go down here to fiber mesh, there, and then we say preview. Oops, I did the wrong way. Let me control click again and then hit preview. There we go. So it'll only do it where it's masked, right? And then once I'm happy with that, I would hit accept, but otherwise I can go to my modifiers and I can change the length. There we go. You can come down here and change the color. Come on. If it decides to update, I'm not sure why it's not updating. That's what it is on the eyeball. Let me go to these ones and I'll just grab one of these. Grass, there we go. So these are just the presets you could use. So if I'm happy with this, you know, side haircut type thing, I hit accept, hit yes, and then there we go. And then you can just use your regular brushes. It comes in as a separate subtool. And then we can shape the hair how we need to. Just keep in mind that this is still polygons, so we're dealing with 124,000 polygons with this hair. Now if you don't want it, you just delete it, hit OK. And you can jump back to the shape that you had, jump back to fiber mesh, and then you could add a different one to the mix. If you're doing something that's more stylized hair, like this one has some setting that's pushing it away from the surface, you can just do geometry. So you can actually use, if you're just doing like more anime type hair, you could just grab cones and just shape cones into the hair directions, right? And then put lines in it. This is Sculpt ZBrush hair. So like that is just sculpted. That's just like a shape, and they've added a lot of Damien Standard to cut those shapes in there. Same thing here. You can see there's the clay buildup that they did, and then afterwards they're going through and then cutting lines all over the place. Okay, this is typically easier because this will translate into other softwares a lot cleaner than fiber mesh will. So that's always an issue, like, you know, when you go from one software to the other, is like, what's the other software going to take? It'll take the fiber mesh, I just don't know how well it's going to render inside of ZBrush, or inside of Keyshot. Oh, not too bad, look at that. Yeah, and obviously it depends on the level of realism, so this is also sculpted. And I believe, too, you can go into here and say preview, and then with the, I don't know which weird one I have here. One of these is width, there it is. So if I crank the width of the hair up, then I can typically have like really thick hair as well. There was another width area. Profile. Bless you. Coverage, coverage. That's the only problem with ZBrush is there's a million things and they're all super tiny. Direction, H tangent, B tangent, clumps, fiber. I don't remember where the other width one was. It was somewhere. Max fibers. Oh, there's the embed one to get it to go inside, yes. The other way. There's length, there's length. Oh, maybe it's offset. Step strength. Yeah, I don't remember where the width one is, but you can make it thicker too and then use that as your starting point for creating stuff if you want to do more this kind of hair versus that kind of hair. Even that kind of hair is kind of like in the middle. It's a weird eyeball. Cool, any other questions? I don't know.